Venezuela accuses the US-backed opposition of sabotaging the country's power supply as Washington threatens more sanctions against the Maduro government. The US House of Representatives passes a bill to counter the influence of so-called dark money from unknown donors in the election process.
It shouldn't be happening, and it's a deeply complicated flaw of the United States system.
It's illegal, then.
No, it's legal.
Legal.
And former US Army intelligence whistleblower Chelsea Manning is back behind bars after refusing to testify to a US grand jury in a case against WikiLeaks. Hi there, it's midday in Moscow this Saturday the 9th of March. I'm Colin Bray at RTHQ with your headline news this hour. First for you, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry is accusing the United States of orchestrating and celebrating an ongoing power outage in the country, said to be the worst in decades.
While in Venezuela people calmly handled the consequences of the electrical sabotage, the entourage of Donald Trump was celebrating and enjoying with guilty perversion the suffering of the Venezuelan people.
A few weeks ago, the Maduro regime blamed iguanas for causing a large electric grid blackout. We have now received the first video of what caused tonight's unprecedented nationwide blackout in Venezuela.
Maduro's policies bring nothing but darkness.
Electricity stations across Venezuela shut down during the Thursday evening rush hour, bringing public transport to a standstill. The power supply is gradually being restored in some parts of the capital. What you're seeing here is the Simon Bolivar International Airport in Caracas, where all flights have been suspended. Opposition leader and self-declared interim president Juan Guaido says the Maduro government's to blame, while the US pointed the finger at years of corruption and underinvestment. Venezuela's defense ministries called the outage an act of sabotage by the United States.
After all we have seen, after the statements from the spokesperson of the North American Empire and those who support them here, no one can be so naive to believe this is a random event. It is an attack on our homeland.
It cannot be normal that 50% of the hospitals do not have electric generators and that the other 50 are barely able to operate during an emergency. The government is inefficient and corrupt, and we know that the end of darkness comes when the usurpers leave power in Venezuela.
Washington says it will not use force to deliver humanitarian aid to Venezuela. That said, another batch of US aid has arrived at the Colombian-Venezuelan border in defiance of an official ban. Self-declared leader Juan Guaido has promised to get those supplies into the country, but President Maduro's refusing to allow the US aid in, calling it a Trojan horse and a pretext for intervention. He is, though, accepting help from the Red Cross and the UN. We asked Walter Cott from the Red Cross about the agency's work in Venezuela.
The situation in Venezuela is, of course, a big demand of support in health, in foods, and in security for the population. And we are working on that in the last more than 3 years, together with any different entities in country and with the communities in country. We are playing our neutral, impartial, and independent role in country. I think the more challenging matter by now is, of course, the lack of resources that we have and the need to have more comprehension about the independent, neutral, and impartial role of entities like us, Red Cross. We are there to serve the human beings, regardless any kind of agenda, ideological or political or religious. We are there playing our role in the way that is necessary to be played, serving the people that is suffering, and we need to expand and increase our power of service in country by working with other actors that are focused on health, livelihoods, nutrition, and really saving people lives and improving the security of people.
Meanwhile, the US Special Envoy to Venezuela says countries could be sanctioned for refusing to recognize Juan Guaido as interim president. Elliot Abrams also threatened new measures against President Maduro.
We are using sanctions and diplomatic actions to pressure the Maduro regime. Are hopeful that other countries will use these and other tools at their disposal. Secondary sanctions, you know, it's out there. It's always a possibility. We have not done it yet, and I wouldn't want to speculate as to whether we will or what would lead us to make that additional decision.
The battle over the Venezuelan presidency, which has dragged on since January, appears to be stuck in stalemate. President Maduro is still in power, and it seems that Washington has no backup plan to force him out, as Igor Zhdanov explains. The U.S. is back to square one on Venezuela. An unambiguous confession by Vice President Pence.
How much longer? Do you have a timeline?
There's no timeline. Now, rewind just a little over a month ago, and here's Mike Pence, the same Mike Pence, announcing Venezuela was on Washington's laundry list in Spanish.
Hola, I'm Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States. The United States supports the courageous decision by Juan Guaido, the President of your National Assembly, to assert that body's constitutional powers, declare Maduro a usurper, and call for the establishment of a transitional government.
That was the moment Washington put itself into regime change gear. Since then, the U.S. heavily invested itself in the crisis. So how did it come to this, a thinly veiled admission of failure? After all, it looked so bright at the start. In mere weeks, Washington projected a no-name mob cheerleader into the international frame. Juan Guaido became the poster boy of the social upheaval as his presidential ambition was quickly backed by America's allies.
Brazil has just issued a note recognizing Juan Guaido as Venezuela's president.
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido.
Señor Guaido. Señor Juan Guaido.
Since then, though, America's plans started to go into a frantic nosedive. Maduro wasn't going anywhere, had and still has the army on his side, and his supporters showed the opposition didn't own the streets of Caracas.
Are you coup mongers? You pro-imperialists? Never traitors? Always loyal? That's how it has to be.
Then, a big ruckus with aid. The U.S. tried getting into Venezuela, and which Maduro didn't allow. Concerned Washington was using its old trick to smuggle guns to arm the mob, which clearly showed just who's still boss in Venezuela. Washington seems to have resisted the temptation to go for the ever-favorite tactic of sending a few thousand soldiers to escort the undesirable leader out of office, well, at least for now. And when confronted with a "what's next?" question, resorts to the same boilerplate platitude over and over again.
All options are on the table.
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 Which, all things considered, sounds more like no options are on the table. And actually, things didn't go much further than hola in the first place.
Guaido has been unable to deliver on his promise to allow humanitarian aid in. The military has not left the side of President Maduro. They continue to support him, and Guaido is looking like a shrinking power, not an expanding one. So this coup seems to have failed. Unfortunately, that means the United States will try other attempts. They're not going to give up. As the U.S. talks about escalating toward militarism, Colombia is saying no, Brazil is saying no, European governments are saying no. People do not want to see that kind of escalation. Its coalition is fraying, Guaido is failing, and so the United States is really in a small box that's shrinking.